Traders, how are you? With Marcello. Today we're doing the recap of what happened in the markets last week. We have the federal government in the US saying that the servers for government coin, the digital dollar, is going to be ready in 2023. We have unprecedented snowing in the middle of the summer in Afghanistan and India. And we even have, I forgot the other stuff I was going to say, so let's get started. The overarching dynamic of what happened this week is that we have a situation where we had very good economic data, and that's what allowed people to think that the Fed is going to be less aggressive in regards to the rate rising, and then taking the money out of the markets that they initially put in. Now, some of you may be too young to remember a time where we had a recession or an economic contraction. For the older, better looking older guys like myself, just kidding. But essentially the dynamic is that it really started in 1999 with the tech blow up. But in 2008, 2009, we had the financial crisis. And that's when all the governments around the world, for the most part, US, Europe, Japan, they all dropped interest rates to almost zero, which is not the lowest in the last, let's say, 10 or 20 years or 100 years. It's the lowest ever in recorded history. And then on top of that, what they did is they just snapped their fingers, printed money, just created more money, and injected that into the markets. So that caused an absolute bubble of everything. That's why we have stocks just exploding to the upside. We have now properties exploding to the upside. And now that they're starting to increase the interest rates and take the money out that they originally injected, we don't have those foundations anymore that the government set in place in 2008. That's basically what's happening. And that's why we're seeing everything fall. Now, on the flip side, we have a situation where nothing falls forever or nothing goes up forever. And that's why we saw an absolute amazing bounce in the markets this week. All the markets in the US and even Canada were positive. The S&P 500 had its first weekly gain in the last 4 weeks and its best gain in the last 2 years. And this kind of is relevant to the fact of that famous quote that Warren Buffett always said, be fearful when others are greedy and be greedy when others are fearful. Whenever we have a situation where we have too much fear in the market always has to balance out. So if there's a lot of fear, if there's a lot of selling, or if it's oversold, eventually it's going to snap back because the market has to always balance itself out, right? When people are really greedy and the market just keeps going up all the time, eventually there's going to be a huge sell-off because the market has to balance out, right? So overall for the week, markets in the US mostly higher. European markets also are mostly higher as well. We had the Paris market, the SAC 40 or the CAC 40, however they say it in France, go up by 3.24%. Latin American markets are mostly lower. Colombia did have a presidential election where they voted for the communists, the only communists in the field of possible candidates. We'll talk about that in just a moment as well. Africa and the Middle East, mostly mixed. Markets in the far east, Asia, Australia, also mostly mixed. And getting to the Bitcoin and cryptocurrency news, I thought this was really fascinating because the Fed, central bank Jerome Powell, which is basically the top guy there at the central bank of the United States, is essentially saying that the servers are going to be ready online by 2023 for what I have very caringly called government coin. The CBDC, or the central bank digital currency, which is the digital dollar. Powell said, quote, rapid changes are taking place in the global monetary system that may affect the international role of the dollar. A U.S. central banking digital currency is being examined to, quote, help the U.S. dollar's international standing. So not to say that Bitcoin's going to disappear, right? It's what I always told you guys. Bitcoin's going to go up. It's going to go down. I have no doubt that it's probably going to make a record high again, but it's going to be interesting what's going to happen with the digital dollar and central bank digital currency, because conspiracy Marcello says, putting the conspiracy theory hat on, I think Bitcoin was started by the CIA to test the blockchain technology to be able to go ahead and launch the central bank digital currencies. That's why they never found the founder of Bitcoin. removing the conspiracy theory hat. The CNMV, which is the financial regulator in Spain, has officially said that Bitcoin is a financial bubble in their annual report. On Sunday, Bitcoin, not this Sunday, you guys are probably going to watch this on the 26th and 27th of June, but the 18th of June, last Sunday, it was the most oversold in its history. It lost 50% in value in just 2 weeks, and that's part of the reason why we're having this pop back. And what I'm going to show you now is some. You guys know that, I've been a trader for a long time now. I do mostly swing trading, then I do day trading now, but I opened up a Bitcoin chart because I never look at the Bitcoin charts, and I thought it was really fascinating what I was seeing, and I wanted to share some of that with you. If you guys are listening to the podcast, you can search for Day Trading Academy on Spotify, wherever you listen. But if you're listening to on the podcast, just search for Marcello Trader or Marcello Day Trader. It'll automatically come up and you'll be able to see what I'm talking about in the video. But there's a pattern that's been repeating itself that I thought that was absolutely fascinating that I just wanted to share with you guys really quickly. Notice this pattern that I have here in the yellow arrows, which is basically just, the market going up a higher high, and then that's when it slams to the downside. And if you notice here, the huge rise up, anytime that you're trading, we always have larger time frames and lower time frames, meaning that whatever it happens on a day-to-day basis generally will repeat itself in a much larger, let's say month to month or week to week basis. This is a daily chart that I have. So notice if I draw the same pattern that we have here, notice that we have the exact same pattern that I have drawn on the left. You guys see that? The higher high, the one peak here on the bottom, and then the slam down. Now, on the recent drop to the downside, we have a very similar pattern. And this I find fascinating because I've been in the financial markets for so long that I kind of, my brain is trained to see these patterns. Notice that we have a very similar pattern here on the downside, which is this one that you see on the right, where we have the higher high on the lower end and then the higher high on the high end. Do you guys see that? So notice, I'll draw you one right here. For example, we have this peak, right? Then the market comes up and makes this immediate peak, comes down, makes the higher high. Then it makes, the lower high, then the higher high. And then after that happens, notice the slam down, right? And then the pattern repeats itself. After the slam down, what do we get? The higher high, then the lower high, and then again the higher high. It's like two peaks on the top and the bottom. You guys see that? And now here, I won't draw it for you to see if you guys can see it, right? Notice here, higher high on the lower end, and then higher high on the higher end. So if the pattern repeats itself now, what we should see is we can go a little bit higher here when we have Bitcoin right now at the price. So we could go maybe just a little bit higher to about 23 or so. And then we'll have the movement back down, which will recreate the higher low, right? The two peaks down here. And then it's going to make the higher high again, which is probably going to go to anywhere between 22.8 to about 25, 24. That point right there is when the market will most likely decide if it's going to continue going up or not. And we're going to probably see the same movement that we have here. And inside this range, after it possibly goes down, because obviously it could just slam to the upside. I could be completely wrong, right? I'm just a guy doing a YouTube video. But this is where I think the market's going to decide what direction it's going to go in. If it slams down after this pattern, we'll get more downside, but we could see a correction now of the pattern and then a little bit of a bear market. And I wanted to show you this because I thought it was really interesting that we had this pattern, because now we can essentially see what's going on with the Bitcoins. Right? Other than that, Sunday, I mentioned about the drop in Bitcoin. Dogecoin jumped almost 10% after it hit the record lows on Sunday. Because Elon Musk, which is the Doge father, he talked about he's continuing to buy Dogecoin. And he's also mentioned some things about Tesla. I'll let you guys know about that in just a moment. But obviously, it went up by 8.5% in 24 hours after Elon Musk said that he's continuing to buy Doge because he's the Doge father. Shiba, on the other hand, Shiba has not gone down as much as the others. Not saying that you guys should buy it. This is for educational purpose only. Not any trading advice or legal advice or any kind of advice. Take a look at Shiba. Bitcoin up higher this week. It went to up almost 5%. It crossed the 20,000 mark. If I'm not mistaken, now on Saturday evening when I'm recording the video for you guys, it's at about 21,000. So again, you guys have the pattern there. We're probably going to see a little bit higher up, come back down, and then another higher high again. And then that's when I think it'll probably make the decision. Let me know if you guys like that too, by the way, because I thought that was pretty cool. Commodities, drought-stricken Lake Mead. They're two of the largest reservoirs in the U.S. that produce energy for 40 million people, which is Lake Mead and Lake Powell. Lake Mead now is literally 150 feet from a dead pool where they're going to have to shut it off and they can't use it anymore. And Lake Powell is in the same situation as well. So the water games have begun in the United States. And I don't know if you guys remember, I did a video here on the channel talking about how I wouldn't be buying any property out in the West where these dry situations are happening, because the value of the houses are literally going to collapse after people literally have no water. Sri Lanka, I thought this was interesting as well. You guys remember I started talking to you guys about the food shortages at the end of the pandemic in 2020. Conspiracy Marcello appears to be correct. Sri Lanka is now giving government workers Fridays off so they can help to grow food and ease the food shortage. So a government of a country, remember that Sri Lanka was the country where they were literally going after politicians and burning down their homes and caning people and hitting people, politicians on the street. They're now giving people days off. And I think this is a foreshadowing of something to come, because conspiracy Marcello. Outside of saying that the preppers were right, we don't have any food shortages here in Colombia. We don't have food baby formula shortages or tampon shortages. So I think this is all engineered. So keep that in mind, because I think this is where we're heading in the US in terms of this food shortages. But, you know, preppers were right. Taking off the conspiracy theory hat now. Excuse me. German economic minister Robert Habeck announced on Sunday that as the country moves away from Russian gas supplies, that there may be a recession, a serious one, if those supplies are cut off. They used to rely on 55% on Russia for those supplies. Now it's at 35%, while EU relied on Russia for 40% of its needs. And now, ironically enough, they're starting to use coal again to be able to fill the gap from those supplies. So let me get this right. When we want to talk about saving the climate, then it's not a good thing that we use coal. So let's rely on an absolutely crazy person in Putin for our literal, okay, I forgot the joke that I was going to say, but for our literal existence, let's not use coal. But now when it's okay for us to use it, now it's okay. Now it's not going to harm the environment, right? That's how it works. See the convenience? Other than that, first weekly loss in crude for the U.S. in 8 weeks. Russia overtakes Saudi Arabia as China's biggest oil provider. Remember that China is the biggest importer of oil in the world. They're offering discounts, Russia of 30%. So, you know, obviously India's not playing the sanction game while China is taking advantage of it. And their imports from Russia went up by 55%. And U.S. energy sources as of 2021, 36% came from oil, 32% natural gas, 8% nuclear power, 11% from coal, and 12% from renewable energy. Just to give you guys an idea of what the actual percentages were, because coal isn't really that big for the U.S. Copper prices hit a 9-month low on Monday. This has to do with the fact that if the Fed is continuing, remember that overall kind of panoramic that I mentioned to you in the beginning of the video, if the central bank in the United States, which is still the biggest economy in the world, is going to raise interest rates and remove the money that they injected into the economy, obviously that means that the economy in the US is not going to do as well. And if we're expecting a recession because of these two things happening, then people are going to use less materials, especially construction materials or industrial materials like copper. So we have a lot less demand for a lot of these materials because we have people that aren't using them or are projecting less of their use in the future because of a possible recession. Precious metals are lower. This has to do with the interest rate hikes. Remember that this is a little bit different than the panorama I told you about, but if the interest rates go up or they're threatening to increase, then the demand for the dollar goes up because the dollar is the least dirty currency in the closet. So everybody switches to the dollar. They start investing, even taking money out of the stock market, for example, because in the institutional game, the stocks or variable assets, right, because they go up and down, they're not a fixed asset like a loan or a bond from the government, is considered higher risk. So people take money out of the stocks, they put them into bonds, and then people start investing more in the dollar, which means that the demand for the dollar goes up, which means that the value of the dollar goes up, which means that all the commodities that are listed in dollars, which is almost all of the dollar, all of commodities in the world, those go down because it's an inverse relationship. Interest rates go up, value of the dollar goes up, commodities go down. And for example, that's one of the reasons why oil, for example, went down. Now, one of the bad things that's happening here is that due to the sanctions, now Russia and China are settling their trade in Chinese yuan or in rubles. So when China buys their oil from Russia, before they used to have to buy dollars and then pay in dollars, and now they're circumventing that altogether. And as that continues to increase, less and less people are going to use dollars, which means that there are more dollars. Listen to this carefully. There are more dollars outside of the United States than there is inside of the United States. So when all those dollars start to come back to the US, it's going to create a hyperinflationary environment because, again, it's demand and supply. If everybody dumps the dollar and those dollars are coming back, that means that there's a lot of supply, which means that the value of the dollar goes down, which means that we're screwed, basically. Because you think inflation was bad now. Oof, wait until you hit hyperinflation. The Russian ruble has surged on Monday to its 7-year high against the dollar on the Moscow exchange. In financial and banking news, so much for those sanctions, huh, guys? Keith Neumeyer, which is the CEO of First Majestic Silver, an amazing silver mining company, says that the U.S. Federal Reserve's hawkish stance is not sustainable, and it's not likely they're going to continue raising rates altogether by the end of 2022. And they're not even going to stop raising rates. They're actually going to lower rates. And another problem is how the U.S. is going to service its higher interest rates on $30 trillion of debt. So remember, if the interest rates rise, we have to pay more money on the debt that we owe. It's like having a credit card. If the rates rise and you owe $10,000 in debt, your interest rate payment or the monthly payment you make is going to go up. The only problem is our interest payment goes up on $30 trillion, which is not a good thing, which is part of the reason why they're saying that they're not going to be able to increase your interest rates anymore. UK's May inflation was the highest since March 1982, with soaring food prices, in addition to their CPI, which is their consumer price inflation, up to a 40-year high at 9.1%, highest of all the G7 countries. Political news, Macron, which is the president in France, lost all of his allies in the absolute majority in the National Assembly. So now he's going to start making some deals with other people, but because he's not going to be able to rule the country anymore without that majority. And Gustavo Petro, which is an ex-guerrilla fighter against the government called M19. He won the elections in Colombia, my dear Colombia, voting for a communist, unfortunately. And now he wants to change things like phasing out oil and coal. Unfortunately, the Colombian government gets 50% of its revenue from oil and coal, so it's still going to be asked where he's going to get the money from because they don't have a lot of other major industry like oil and coal that brings in that kind of money. Economic news, the National Association of Realtors said on Tuesday that their existing home sales fell by the fourth consecutive month, dropping 3.4% in May and 8.4% since 8.6% since May. So the housing market's going down, which is not bueno. Topping the house price for the first time went up by $400,000 for the first time ever. But the market remains relatively hot because houses are only on the market for about 16 days. I just sold a house in Tampa. I got it under contract in 3 days. So I think it depends where you're going to be. The economic news, flash estimate for the German PMI, which is the Purchasing Managers Index, came in weaker than expected for both France and Germany. That's not good news because they're some of the biggest economies in the world, and there's other indicators now that the economies aren't doing as well. An initial weekly U.S. jobless claims declined by 2,000, while the continuing U.S. jobless claims went up by 5,000. So the amount of new people that are asking for benefits went down by 2K, but the amount of people that want to remain on the benefits, the unemployment benefits, went up by 5K. So we have more people wanting to stay on the disemployment benefits than are coming online. Not bueno. We have more people not employed than more people employed, even though we have a record number of jobs. UK retail sales fell by 0.5%. Again, if I'm not mistaken, the 7th largest economy in the world, their retail sales are going down, which is the biggest part of the economy. Not bueno. And Spain's economy went up by only 0.2% in the first quarter. It expanded by that much, which is a significant slowing of the growth rate as well. So we have a lot more indications that the global economy, even on a sector by sector basis, is not doing well. Tesla shares rose by 9.35% on part of upbeat comments by the richest man in the world, Elon Musk. He's talking about a strong demand for EVs and further clarification on the upcoming layoffs. The stock is still down almost 33% this year in 2022. And Warren Buffett, Berkshire Hathaway bought another 9.6 million shares of Occidental Petroleum Corp after he's already spent $7 billion earlier this year and another $336 million last month. So I did a video talking about how all the rich people were selling their stocks, right? And I always tell you guys, pay attention to what they do, not what they say. Don't listen to the clowns on CNBC because they're just trying to hustle something. So he's starting to buy, petroleum companies, oil companies. Toyota, world's largest automaker by sales, is recalling 2,700 of its first mass-produced electric vehicles because they're saying that there's a risk that the wheels might fall off. So it looks like they haven't got those electric vehicles dialed in just yet. And then Bill Gates, the largest a-hole in the world, is continuing to buy up land in the United States, which the Attorney General in North Dakota is investigating now. His total acreage is almost at 270,000 acres. 90% of that is farmland. And isn't he just the most coincidental best businessman in the world? He invests in the vaccines and all of a sudden there's a pandemic. He now is investing in food and agriculture. There's food shortages. We'll leave conspiracy Marcello there in the corner. There couldn't possibly be a coincidence. Baby food formula shortage in the US. He invested in a thin synthetic food baby formula company. Just a coincidence. Well, so let's keep my conspiracy Marcello in the corner. It could be just a coincidence. No way he would be doing this on purpose, right? No way. He's a big stay-hole in the world. Trade news, Russian government is summoning the EU's ambassador to Moscow, angry over a rail blockade. So there's a former territory of Germany, which is now part of Russia, called Kaliningrad. Kaliningrad. I don't speak Russian, so I'm sorry if I'm butchering it. So essentially Europe, there's Kaliningrad right here, and then Europe literally just surrounds this, and then mainland Russia is right here. Lithuania has decided to not allow Russia to send supplies to its own territory via rail, which could start World War III because the sanctions in the EU are technically for Europeans buying Russian goods, not Russia sending Russia goods to its own territory. So they're furious about it, and they said, quote, they're going to have serious consequences if they keep banning the goods, which Russia is saying is 50% of the goods that they need there in their territory. China's shipments of electric vehicles have rebounded. They're now up 122% from a year before, now that we have the lockdowns gradually ending. And in technology, South Korea's second test launch of a domestically produced Nuri rocket has successfully sent a satellite into orbit. Big step in their space program, while only China, Japan, India, United States, European Union, and Russia are the only other countries to send a satellite into orbit. Weighing over 1 ton, technicality. In international events, a heat wave shattering U.S. daily temperatures across the Southwest, Central Plains, and Midwest. Over 100 million people now are on a heat alert and are avoiding to stay indoors. You guys remember I told you that this is going to get worse over the next 10 years. Not only environmental problems, but social problems, economic problems, and excessive heat and power shortages are probably going to continue in the country, that part of the country as well. Nicaragua, after the U.S. imposed fresh sanctions on the country, are hosting Russia forces to be able to train inside. Remember that this is a country right next to Mexico and Central America. And in unusual facts this week, we have southern China being swollen by rain. There's literally roads inside of cities that have turned into just bustling rivers. And pending home sale near Palm Beach, where most of you guys know where Miami is. It's on the opposite coast of Florida, the Caribbean coast. Sold a record-shattering $175 million house, which broke the previous record of $140 million. The previous Netscape founder, Netscape, the internet company, if you guys remember. How many of you guys remember this sound? This is funny. How many of you guys remember this sound? Only a handful of you guys remember that sound, because the new millennials, us old school guys, only remember that amazing sound. We had to pay for internet by the hour. You guys remember that? Now I can literally talk to somebody in China from my cell phone. It's amazing. Yellowstone National Park, one of the U.S. most popular tourist attractions, is opening for again on Wednesday after being closed for the first time in 34 years because record flooding and rock slides. You see the situation with the climate. Colombian Army is releasing the first images of the world's most valuable shipwrecks. 200 tons of treasure with gold coins, silver coins, and emeralds worth about $17 billion in today's prices. And an unprecedented summer snowstorm. Summer, which is not supposed to happen, hit Afghanistan, similarly in India and Pakistan. Not bueno. That's the news for this week, guys. Let me know if you guys have any questions. Always remember, the preppers were right. We'll see you next week.